May the 17th, 1995, Caroline Beale, a civil servant from London, arrives in a New York court to apply for bail. She says she has done nothing wrong, but the prosecution say that Caroline is a murderer.
This is Caroline and friend with their first snowman. This is Caroline over Epping Forest when she was 5, in the mud. She was a happy girl. She was a very spirited, independent, willed girl. She was a real joy to have as a child, really.
On September the 22nd, 1994, Caroline Beale was arrested in New York at Kennedy Airport as she was boarding a flight to London.
I was in the kitchen, I think I was making tea, and the phone went. I went in to answer the phone, and it was Caroline's boyfriend's father. He said, "I've got some terrible news for you." I put the phone down and came out into the garden and told Daphne.
She said, "Caroline's in trouble in America." And I took it to be that it was a mugging, or she'd been caught up in something like that, or seen something. We just were not prepared for what she said. She said, "Caroline has been arrested, and she's been charged with the murder of her newborn baby." And I said, "That's impossible, she wasn't pregnant."
Caroline had been going through Kennedy Airport security. Caroline had been pulled to one side and searched, and that they had found under her coat, in a plastic bag, a baby. Well, our initial reaction was, you know, what baby? Whose baby? No, there couldn't be a baby.
Why did you kill your baby?
She was returned to the police precinct at Building 269, where she was arrested for murder to and tampering with evidence. She'll then be transported to the 113th Detective Squad for further processing and a joint investigation.
Caroline had been on holiday in New York with her boyfriend and his 2 brothers. She told police that she had given birth to a baby girl on her own in the bathroom of their hotel suite. She insisted that the baby had been stillborn and that she had not killed it. Her boyfriend and his brothers said that they knew nothing about the baby's death, or even that Caroline had been pregnant. They were released after questioning.
Within several hours of the arrest, I heard about the case, and I went out to meet Ms. Beale at the hospital, and I spoke with her there on 2 different occasions. She seemed to understand everything that was going on around her, and she gave a compelling account of what she believed happened. She was in the hospital across the street. They were doing an autopsy of the baby, and x-rays of the baby were done. The baby was a full-term little baby girl, average birth weight. The baby was x-rayed, and the baby's lungs were full of air, which indicates that the baby had taken several breaths. In addition, the baby's eyes had what's called petechiae, which indicate that the baby was suffocated. And so it became homicide right away.
It's clear from what the doctor saw during the autopsy that there's no question that when this baby was born, this baby was alive and breathing.
It was just laying there. It was awful. It was dead, so in the bag it didn't move, honestly.
What you're saying does not make any sense at all with the medical findings.
But it's true. I swear to you, it was true.
She was very ill, very fragile, very, very frightened. I certainly knew that this was not a woman who deserved to be in a penitentiary. She was not the murderer and is not the murderer that the DA is suggesting she is.
The words monster baby killer come so quickly to mind. I have the most awful burden in this case. I'm defending an innocent person. That's my worst fear, that a nightmare of injustice could take place.
You know, I can't even remember a lot of it. But it's like being in like a complete state of shock, you know? And they took my clothes, and all the policemen had guns. One of them was really awful. He was there all the time, and I can remember exactly what he was wearing. I can remember exactly what finger he had a ring on. And when he kept saying to me, "Don't cry, sweetheart, you're breaking my heart."
If she was convicted of murder, she could go to jail for 15 years to life to 25 years to life. That's what the penalty is for murder in this state. It's not only punishment for a terrible, heinous crime, it's also, you know, to send a message out there that this is not the kind of behavior that's going to be tolerated. And that even though this baby was maybe only, you know, several minutes old, it was still a human life. And, you know, still deserved a chance to live.
Caroline Beale was 30 years old. She had lived all her life close to her family home in the London suburb of Chingford. Her school days were unremarkable. She had been a girl guide and had taken part in the Duke of Edinburgh's award. After leaving school at 17, she went to a college of further education and for 10 years had worked as an administrator in the Department of Health.
Very ordinary. Very ordinary and quite well behaved. We didn't have a wild teenage years. We used to go for weekends down to Brighton and different places. But
Cromer, her parents had a house in a flat.
A holiday home in Cromer.
So we spent quite a lot of weekends up there in the winter. No, very ordinary, very normal. The odd party. Nothing wild at all.
I'm just a regular person, you know? And I've never done anything bad in my life before, and now that you know, I just went to work and came back from work and was with my friends and that.
Is it straight at the front? Push your tummy. She was brilliant at my wedding. She was very bubbly all day, wasn't she? Yeah, she was lovely.
We spent the whole day laughing and
lovely day.
The little bridesmaid came along a little bit later and immediately latched on to Caroline and really sort of spent most of the day, all the photographs and everything, you know, she was holding Caroline's hand. She could relate very easily to children, and they would naturally flock to Caroline.
I just know that one day I was a normal person and everything, and the next day people interrogating me, you know? It's just bizarre, I think. The whole thing is bizarre.
In the district attorney's office, Caroline's situation evokes no special sympathy. She is being prosecuted by their Special Victims Bureau.
Caroline Beale is, in some ways, was more fortunate than others. You know, we have a lot of women here who've killed their babies, who are extremely poor, who don't have medical care, who don't have prenatal care, who have no husband, who have no money, who have no support system, and they become overwhelmed by their circumstances and they kill their baby. I mean, that's a terrible thing to do, of course, but, you know, it's in some ways, you know, one can understand being totally overwhelmed by one's circumstances and not having access to the help that someone with a little bit more money might have. I mean, Caroline Beale, at least if she had wanted it, had the access to prenatal care, had a mortgage, had parents.
For Caroline's parents, the months after her arrest have been emotionally and financially draining. They've made repeated trips to New York to visit her and campaign for her release on American television.
Unbelievable. If it had been an American girl in England, we've been told this wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened to her. I can't understand what's going on. It just wouldn't have happened to an American girl in England.
What Daphne's saying is that had the same circumstances overtaken a visitor from this country to England, she would have been given therapy and treated in a hospital, and we've been told this, and we're convinced she would have been returned to her loved ones.
This is unreal to us, totally unreal.
It's just like a dream scenario, really. We don't see it as a real situation.
It's like having two lives, this life and our real life, and running parallel with one another, stepping from one to the other when we have to. It's totally unreal. We just want to go back and work in the garden and hide.
The only prison I know is Holloway and Pentonville from driving past in the rush hour.
Caroline's never been in a prison in her life. The only time she's been in the police station is when she visited it on the Girl Guides visit. I mean, the only thing we've been involved with the police is when you had a parking ticket. So.
And Caroline hasn't even had a parking ticket.
Since being arrested, Caroline has been held on Rikers Island, which houses 17,000 prisoners awaiting trial in New York courts. It's the largest prison in America.
Rikers Island is awful. It's a huge island in the middle of the East River, and to get to it you have to go across a 3/4-mile bridge. The first time I was there myself, I was terrified. I really was. The guards, women guards and male guards, were sitting around, slouching around. They had their weapons in their pockets, and they just let rip with their bad language. And it's certainly the last place on earth that I would have dreamt to see Caroline.
I think I'm stronger than I ever thought I was. I try and, someone told me that you have to plan your day. So when I get up, I think, well, what can I do to make half an hour go? So I have to spend half an hour in the shower, and then I try and read, and then I do some drawing, and then I've been writing poetry, and I've been writing a diary as well, a journal. Make things out of soap, make kind of like a teddy bear thing out of it.
Did you realise you were so ingenious?
No.
Is it surprising to you?
Well, it's surprising what you make do with when you don't have anything.
Before Caroline's arrest, Peter and Daphne had never been to America. But since then, they've had to put together a team of lawyers and psychiatrists to explain their daughter's behaviour and defend her in court.
Did you see Caroline? 2 hours we had in with her, so it was good. You both have been...
The first person they contacted in New York was Dr. Margaret Spinelli, a psychiatrist. She has become a central figure in the defence team.
You should be very proud of her. She's very, very special.
Well, we're certainly not ashamed of her over this. We don't hold anything against Caroline over this because we realise that it really isn't her fault, I don't think.
You know, that's the whole problem. How can you punish somebody for being ill?
From the outset, Dr. Spinelli was convinced that Caroline had been suffering from a temporary but severe mental illness at the time her baby died.
She has no history of violence, no history of impulse discontrol. She's never harmed anybody. I had not one question in my mind from my first evaluation that she was ill and was not responsible, absolutely not responsible, and could not have the capacity to hurt her baby.
But Caroline's court-appointed lawyer rejected this analysis. He was urging her to plead guilty to manslaughter in the hope of receiving a reduced sentence of 12 years. So Dr. Spinelli decided to find another lawyer.
I started to ask around some people that I knew who were in the legal profession. Mike Dowd's name came up, and so I called him. And I said, would you be interested, and will you do this for almost nothing?
I phoned up Michael Dowd, and I said, would you represent Caroline, and how much would you charge? And we settled for $10,000. So I then said, well, if the case ends very quickly, I said, perhaps we could pay you some more money. And he said, forget it. you've got yourself an attorney. A deal's a deal.
Michael Dowd's strategy is to argue that Caroline is totally innocent and should be immediately released because she was suffering from a mental disease or defect when her baby died.
It's an admission that the act took place, but saying that we, as a civilized society, decide not to hold people who are mentally ill at the time to a significant degree responsible criminally.
Initially, Michael Dowd saw strong parallels between Caroline's case and that of Anne Green, whom he had successfully defended in 1988. She had killed 2 of her newborn babies when, according to experts called by Dowd, her mind was unbalanced because she was suffering from postpartum psychosis. This is a rare mental illness which affects 1 in every 1,000 women who give birth.
Under the stress of the birth process, that she lapsed into a postpartum psychosis.
During a psychotic episode, the woman loses contact with reality. A woman will hear voices telling her that her family is really no good, they're out to get her, they're going to hurt the baby, they're going to take the baby. And then a voice, which may be the voice of a devil for her or whatever, might say to her, you must take the baby and throw the baby in the ocean, okay? Because that's the only way the baby is going to be saved. She has no way of understanding any intent. She has no capacity to be able to decide right from wrong.
Guilty or not guilty?
Not responsible by virtue of mental disease or defect.
While postpartum psychosis had provided Michael Dowd with a clear-cut defense for Anne Green, Caroline's actions cannot be so easily explained. Postpartum psychosis is usually triggered by hormonal changes that take place days after giving birth, yet Caroline is charged with killing her child just moments after it was born.
Postpartum depression usually doesn't kick in, a few minutes after the baby is born. And a postpartum psychotic episode is usually indicative of more, longer lasting illness, which, I have no evidence that she had. And so, my guess is that I wouldn't have, a very difficult time dealing with that.
When I heard about the story in the press, I realized that this was a very serious situation, and I felt that I might be able to help. From my knowledge of this general area of pregnancy-related illness, and in particular of infanticide. And so I offered to help, and I went over to see her there.
After spending many hours with Caroline in the women's wing of Rikers Island, Professor Brockington rejected postpartum psychosis as a viable defense. He became convinced that she had in fact been mentally ill throughout the months leading up to the birth, and that this could explain her actions in the moments immediately after her baby was born.
She was severely depressed during the pregnancy. She was very low-spirited. She had ceased to care for herself, to pay attention to her appearance. She no longer wished to go out and meet people. She used to be a very outgoing person. She'd lost all her spontaneity and joy. She slept very badly. That sometimes she would sleeping excessively, but a lot of time she had slept very badly, and she lost a lot of weight.
Professor Brockington will be a key witness in Caroline's defense. His report, like those of other psychiatrists consulted, links her depression to her friend Alison Taylor, who had recently died.
I think it was very obvious what the cause of it was. The death of her friend under very unpleasant circumstances of recurrence of a cancer of the breast. And she died in a miserable, emaciated state, having previously been a very lively person.
She was really outgoing and attractive, and she was just such a laugh and everything. And she was like the kind of person that you could tell that you felt like you've known all your life. And, I was, so close to her,
She was a very strong, very bubbly, outgoing, intelligent girl, and Caroline looked up to her in a very much sort of role model way.
I suppose that she was like the stronger one of us two, and she kind of, in a way, protected me from a lot of things, you know.
Alison had been diagnosed as suffering from breast cancer in 1991. Her initial treatment at the Royal Free Hospital appeared to have been successful, but in July 1993 the cancer recurred and she was readmitted.
They'd taken her out for weekends and gone over to Hampstead Heath with her and taken her out when she was in hospital, when she was too ill to walk. They took her in a wheelchair.
Alison had been an important figure, not only for Caroline, but for her boyfriend, Paul Farraway. Alison was engaged to Paul's brother, and as her cancer became terminal, Paul and Caroline's home became a focus for grieving friends and relatives.
What were you doing?
I had to be, like, strong for all of them, you know? And, like, when they came round our house, like, Corinne and Majetta were upset, and everyone was upset, and I just had to be the one who kind of, like, say, oh, come on, Alison wouldn't want us to be like this, you know?
By the spring of 1994, Alison's doctors at the Royal Free had given up any hope of saving her. For Caroline, this news coincided with the discovery that she was expecting a baby. By the time of Alison's death in June, Caroline was almost 6 months pregnant, but had told nobody.
She couldn't tell anybody associated with her fiance's family because she didn't want to eclipse the grief that was being shown for Alison, and I think there was a considerable amount of that being shown.
It just seemed impossible to reveal that she'd become pregnant. And then, at about the time that Alison died, she experienced the movement stopping, and she came to believe that the baby had died. Now, that's very unusual. There is a good deal written about denial of pregnancy, and there are various forms of denial of pregnancy. But I don't remember a case in which the mother has believed that the baby had died, and that was the reason why she lost interest and no longer paid any attention to the pregnancy and made no preparations.
Caroline kept her secret to the end. Seen here surrounded by her family just 3 weeks before her trip to America, she was in her 9th month of pregnancy, but to those around her she appeared perfectly normal.
She didn't look pregnant at all at my daughter's christening. I gave her a cuddle at the front door and said, cheerio, I'll see you again soon. I didn't feel a bump or anything when I cuddled her at the front door, and as far as I was concerned, she couldn't possibly have been full term.
See you later. All right.
Caroline had not even told Paul Farraway, the baby's father. They had been going out since Caroline was a teenager and had been engaged for 3 years. They lived together and had bought their own home, but at no point did Paul suspect that Caroline was pregnant.
It is incredible, you may say, but it happens quite often. And denial of pregnancy to the point where a baby suddenly appears in the bathroom and nobody has realized that the young lady was pregnant. That is not an uncommon event. There's not a great deal written on it. And there are only 2 studies that I know of which have attempted to estimate the frequency, but it's something like 1 in 500 pregnancies.
It's very odd. I mean, it's very strange to me, but I've seen it happen before, and I've seen defendants get convicted of murder or plead guilty to some lesser charge after they have concealed their pregnancies and killed their children.
Why was it that you didn't tell anyone about the baby?
I don't know.
The baby was linked in her mind with Alison, and when Alison died, this perhaps fed into the idea that the baby had also died. That seems to me a reasonable psychodynamic conclusion to reach.
Caroline and Paul and his 2 brothers decided to go on holiday to America to get over the death of Alison. And they thought going over there would really be able to get them over the trauma, and they'd come back, you know, more able to cope with life afterwards.
They arrived in New York on the 17th of September 1994. By then, Caroline was 9 months pregnant.
Dear Mum and Dad, just to let you know we have got here okay. The weather is very hot and humid. The air conditioning is a real plus. Have been to the top of the World Trade Center and round the Statue of Liberty. See you soon, no doubt, before you get this card.
They were very outgoing, very pleasant. They did a lot of traveling in and out of the hotel, enjoying some of the sights that New York has to offer. Caroline in particular was very pleasant as well, very courteous, and seemed very normal. Nothing abnormal about her behavior at all.
In fact, Caroline was increasingly subdued and tired. She spent most evenings asleep in the hotel suite.
The trip to New York backfired. You know, it just wasn't possible to enter into the spirit of the thing when Alison wasn't there. So she appeared to continue to be depressed while she was in New York, and she continued to believe that the baby was dead.
They'd spent the last day of their holiday on a boat trip. And in the evening, Paul and his brothers wanted to find a bar for a quick drink before going to bed early. They ended up in the St. Mark's Bar on First Avenue, but Caroline was not with them. Earlier on, she had complained of stomach pains and had decided to remain in the hotel suite, alone.
She says that she did not know she was going to labor, that when she had abdominal pain, she did not realize that those were the labor pains, and that she suffered these severe pains in the evening when the men had gone out, and she ran a bath in order to soothe the pain, and this worked, and then she went to bed, and then the pains returned, she ran a bath again. So at that stage, she was in very severe pain. She was having, if you like, a medieval labor before they had any help at all, no analgesics, and no help from midwifery. And this was the first labor, first delivery of quite a large baby, slightly above average weight. And it must have been an excruciating experience.
The funny part is no one heard anything. And my office happens to be right next door to that apartment, and I didn't notice anything or hear anything abnormal. And I was working late. I think that night in question I was working late till around maybe 10 or 11 o'clock, and I did not notice anything out of the ordinary.
Meanwhile, the brothers had decided that rather than getting an early night, they would stay on until the band finished playing.
She says that she thought she was dying, so she could well have developed a depersonalization at that stage, which is common when people are in states of extreme fear. And that is a state of a sort of dreamlike state in which the person feels separated from the environment. They're not really in touch with what's going on. Now that's important because this infant was delivered into the bath. It's actually being kept alive by the umbilical cord, but we don't know how long it's lying there. Babies can be very knocked about by delivery. They often require resuscitation. This infant received no resuscitation. It may have been a very poor way. At some point, she comes to, and she sees a baby lying in the bath. She knows the baby is dead. She'd realized she's given birth. She knows this is the baby who died, as she believed, and there she sees a dead baby. She cuts the cord. Now, at that point, the baby is deprived of its oxygen supply, and it's got really minutes to live. And it's also under a maximum stimulus to breathe, to gasp. And I suppose that it's obviously the baby did breathe. It breathed at least a few breaths, according to the autopsy report. We don't know whether it uttered a cry or not, or whether it just gasped a few times, or whether it moved at all. But if she were in a dreamlike state, automatic kind of state, or if she were somewhat befuddled, she wouldn't have noticed that. If she had been expecting that the baby was dead.
It just came out and straight away in the bath, and it was just there, and it just wasn't moving or anything. What did you do? I just got the scissors and cut the thing, and then I took it out of the bath, and it wasn't moving, so I put it in the bag, and then I went into the bedroom, and I just put it by the side of the bed.
We have really two separate explanations for the interaction between her psychological state and the baby's death. On the one hand, there is the depression with the belief that the baby has died, and therefore no effort being made to resuscitate the baby. And the other is that she may have had impaired consciousness. The whole thing seemed like a dream.
At 2:30 in the morning, the brothers returned. Caroline was asleep, and they went to bed, noticing nothing unusual. Next day, they left their luggage at the hotel and headed into Manhattan.
I was working front desk that day, and I did check her out. And there is a little room right behind the reception where guests usually store luggage for a late flight. And she did spend an extreme amount of time in the room and insisted that the door be locked once she was in the room. I assume maybe she was changing clothing or something to that effect. But it did seem kind of strange that she spent an awful amount of time in that room doing something with the luggage.
The four of them spent the day shopping. Caroline behaved perfectly normally, but in her duffel bag, she was carrying the body of her baby.
I spoke to the housekeeper that cleaned the room that night. According to her recollection, there was only one slightly stained, blood-stained towel that she discarded. So it was assumed that maybe Caroline maybe had discarded of the other towels or had done a very good job of cleaning the bathroom facility before they checked out, not to leave any traces of evidence, I would assume.
I mean, from the minute the baby was born, there were efforts to conceal the birth and to conceal the baby herself. You know, there's evidence that she concealed the baby and that she engaged in some deception to do that. And anybody who has the capacity to do those things, it's hard that they would be hard pressed to prove she's suffering from a mental disease or defect.
That evening, after collecting the rest of their luggage from the hotel, they took a car to Kennedy Airport. Caroline was still carrying the baby in her duffel bag.
It's explicable only if one's thinking is distorted. There may not be much outside reality. What might be there is the child and protecting the child and being close to the child, particularly if the child represented a loved one.
The only reason that Caroline is where she is today is because she cared so much for the baby, even though it was dead, that she couldn't leave it behind, and she tried to bring it with her, obviously because she loved the child. Had she any premeditation in what she'd done, she could have dumped the baby anywhere and no one would ever have associated it back to her because she had no sign of being pregnant. No one knew she was pregnant. She could have walked away from it so easily.
We've asked her why she was trying to bring the baby back to England, and she said, "Mum, I just couldn't leave her behind." That's not the answer of someone who deliberately killed her baby. She had bonded with the child like any other mother knows that real special feeling that you have for a child that you've born. She just couldn't leave the baby behind.
After checking into Air India Flight 102, Caroline was passing through the security barrier when a woman guard stopped her.
And what did you say to her when she asked you what was in the bag? It was baby. You told her what it was? What exactly did you say? It was baby.
I mean, the thing that I found most compelling in the beginning was the way she was arrested, and that's getting on a plane, you know, in the area of a metal detector, when they ask, what's under your coat? And she says, you know, a dead baby. You know, there's a part of me, as a lawyer, but more importantly as a human being with common sense that says, we really need psychiatrists to figure this out? I mean, this is crazy. In layman's terms. I mean, this is clearly the act of someone who is not functioning in any sense in a reasonable manner.
It's either completely irrational, which is probably what her doctors might say, or it may be the ultimate in concealing evidence. Take it out of the country where the trail of, you know, what happened is going to be completely erased and get rid of it. You can look at it from either of those perspectives.
through an airport with security checks and so on?
Usually metal detectors don't go off. And she had concealed the baby for 9 months. It may have been, you know, she may have believed that she could easily do this. Metal detectors don't go off when dead babies go through the X-ray machine. I mean, she got caught because she had the baby positioned in kind of an odd way, but it was in a position where she was trying to conceal it.
During her time on Rikers Island, Caroline has received over 600 letters and has been visited by family, friends and work colleagues. Her boyfriend, Paul Farraway, has not been to see her. Their only contact, the occasional phone call.
I think that, like, part of me is missing, and I think of what we could have done, you know, with, like, with Paul and everything, and I feel guilty for Paul because I feel like I've deprived him of something as well. You know, I love Paul very much, but I just feel that he could be there a bit more for me, you know?
Every day before dawn, bosses leave Rikers Island taking prisoners to courthouses throughout New York City. Today, Caroline is required for a pre-trial hearing. It's now a familiar process.
They put the handcuffs on, and then they put a block through the handcuffs, and then they put the chain round me like that and round there, and then they put a padlock on it there, and then they put these things on my legs, and you have to walk with them. It's not just that it's humiliating, it's the fact that everyone thinks that I'm some kind of awful person.
The Beales are wonderful people, but they're not rich people. And they don't have, you know, the almighty dollars to put up to get her out. So we really have to appeal to the decency of the DA's office to really make an arrangement, if possible, to let her out without monetary bail attached to it.
So you're going to ask the judge next time to grant bail?
I'm going to ask the district attorney to agree to it in the interest of just human decency.
Once again, there's no formal hearing, so Caroline spends the day in the cells, while in a corridor the DA refuses to allow bail, and Michael Dowd hands over psychiatric reports, which he hopes will prove that Caroline was not responsible for her actions.
We handed over reports today from Doctors Spinelli from Columbia Presbyterian and Dr. Kumar, who is a professor.
To have Caroline acquitted, Michael Dowd will have to convince a jury that she was mentally ill. The burden of proof is entirely on his shoulders.
It's rarely a successful defense in these cases because, you know, the standard of proving a mental disease or defect is very, very high. A discussion about bail and a date to determine when my doctors will take a look at the defendant and decide on their opinion of her psychological state.
If she were tried in England, Caroline would probably receive psychiatric treatment rather than a heavy prison sentence. But American law makes no allowance for women who have just given birth.
I understand that in England there's an infanticide act which treats these cases more lightly. But in the United States you don't get extra points for killing a baby as opposed to an adult. The jury will decide at the time of trial, if this case does go to trial, whether she had a mental disease or defect which prevented her from understanding the nature or consequences of her acts and that they were wrong. And if that's what they decide, of course, she'll be acquitted. I represent the baby and the people of the state of New York, and I represent the position that these kinds of things cannot happen and go unpunished.
In our soundbite society, in our 20-second soundbite, it sounds great. I represent the victims. I speak for the child. Well, terrific. I mean, if you can't see Caroline Beale as a victim in this, then that line is, with the greatest certainty that I can muster in my mind, means you are inviting more women and more children to die.
You know, I'm not sure what she's a victim of. You know, there are women who are battered and battered and battered by their husbands within an inch of their life, and they finally take their husband's gun and blow their husband's brains out. That's a case with two victims. You know, I'm not sure that I understand what she's a victim of in this case.
And what's all this like for the two of you?
Stressful.
Very stressful. We're not used to dealing with the media at all. We're very private people. And this is, but we know that we've got to do this because we're fighting for our daughter. We need her home, and she needs to be home.
We're on a small pension. We're not employed anymore. And the money we have, we've saved up for our retirement. It's difficult to make a judgment about how many calls are likely to be made upon it. Sometimes you get depressed because you can't think of anything else to do or anybody else to write to, or you've written to lots of people who don't reply. Daphne broke down yesterday. She said, I just can't go on with this anymore. And she broke down emotionally.
The first time we visited Caroline, we asked her if she had a name for the baby, and she shook her head. And either we felt that she couldn't or she wouldn't name the baby, but after a couple more days, she came up with the name Olivia Ann, and that's what she wanted her called. But that's about what she has said about the baby.
We never talk about the baby. When we first saw Caroline the first few times, we did ask her a few questions, and we did get a few answers, but it always ended in tears.
If I just had a cast on her arm, and the issue was, did she break her arm, you know, the jury would be jumping to, and most people, and I mean the jury in a societal sense, would be jumping to the conclusion, oh yes, well, she broke her arm, you can see the cast. But when something malfunctions in our minds, there is no bruise that is observable, and it's very tough for us to grasp it and accept it.
This was a baby who was perfectly well-formed, was, you know, in no way, you know, deformed or, you know, small or premature or anything. There are a million people in this state who would have given anything to have this child. And, you know, she decided on her own to kill this baby. And, you know, I think the case is a very sad case, you know, all the way around. But, you know, I can't forget about that child.
I know baby's died. Our grandchild has died. We would have loved that grandchild. Caroline knows we would have loved that grandchild. There is no reason for her to hurt her.
Well, it doesn't make any sense, does it? It doesn't make any sense to us.
There are several cases where crimes don't make sense, but they have to prove that she was suffering from a mental disease or defect, not that what she did that day just didn't make much sense. And, you know, I don't see a reason why she did this to this baby. I may never know what it is, but I also don't have to prove it.
You know, they just have no compassion for anything from what I've been through, and that I'm far away from home and everything. They just, to them, I guess I'm just a criminal, the same as the person who's out there shooting drug dealers or whatever, you know, because they don't give me any more or any less than them. And I've never, you know, I've never even done anything wrong, and I'm not even in my own country, you see.
May the 17th, 1995, Caroline is given bail after 8 months on Rikers Island. She's not allowed to leave New York and will now be assessed by a psychiatrist appointed by the district attorney.
Keep that area clear. Tell everybody out of this. Sorry,
Like
get your head out of the way, please.
thank everyone for all the help they've given me, and just be glad to get out of Rikers Island.
Caroline came to New York for a week's holiday. That was over a year ago. Today she lives with friends of her lawyer and cannot leave until her case is resolved.
It's beginning to feel like England doesn't exist. I kind of like go to this coffee bar to have a cup of coffee, and like a truck or something would go past and it had like New York on the side of it, and I think, oh, this is so bizarre, you know? It's almost, sometimes it's like being in the midst of a dream, you know? And it's like that I have no control over anything I do, and it's the only way I can explain it. I know this sounds really strange, but it's like someone has torn your life into shreds and like put them in a hat and is now kind of like juggling them about, you know? And that's how it seems.
The wait is very long. It's so unbelievable. I don't know if it's different in Britain, but this long wait with the judicial system and this hanging over people's heads like this, you know, I don't know what to say about it. It just seems like it's kind of, it's torture, you know? It doesn't matter if you're out of jail. It's hanging over your head.
We're really in kind of a legal limbo in terms of the progress of the case, because we're waiting for the prosecution psychiatrist report to determine what they believe is the mental state, or was the mental state, of Caroline at the time this all happened.
And how are they determining that? What was that process?
The process was that their psychiatrist had a number of interviews with Caroline that were grueling, very difficult.
A couple of times it got particularly heavy going, and you know, I was kind of like physically a wreck, and I was sick a couple of times, and I mean, at one stage I couldn't speak, you know, because I was so like hyper and hyperventilating and that, but we got Dr. Spinelli on the phone, and she kind of like calmed the situation down.
Every week, Caroline visits Dr. Spinelli's Manhattan clinic for psychotherapy and medication.
I do feel proud of her. She's been very committed to treatment. I think there are lots of times when she could have said, I quit, I've had it, I'm not going to have a life anyway. But she didn't.
How long do you sit with her? Just an hour, and then we have...
She made it through Rikers, you know, and she was very resourceful there. I mean, you have to have a certain savvy to be able to go to bed and wake up in a place like that every day. It also gives you an appreciation for life and, you know, what you didn't have.
I think I'm more streetwise and more confident and a lot more whole. I mean, I do things on my own that I would never have dreamed of doing in London, you know? Like going, I went to movies on my own the other day. My mom and dad, they say that I have to make my life here, and that's kind of what I'm doing at the moment. And you know, these are, Americans are, they're like my family now, because they, in the beginning, they were all I had. You know? And so now I've become very close to them. I mean, my goodness, they brought me this far, so I'm pretty sure that they could see me through.
The legal limbo of the previous 8 months is now over. Last week, the district attorney's psychiatrist finally delivered her all-important assessment of Caroline's mental state at the time her baby died. Today, Michael Dowd and Caroline are back in court for discussions with the judge and the district attorney. The next move is up to the DA. She must now decide what, if any, charges to press, and that decision will be based on the psychiatrist's report.
I mean, we were, and I think Caroline and her family were really uplifted by the content of the report, which we got Tuesday night.
from the prosecution psychiatrist that essentially found that Caroline was suffering from a significant depression and in a dissociative state at the time of the delivery of the child, and recommended a course of therapy and medication.
But despite these findings, the district attorney took a hard line once in court. Her position is that while the report's clinical diagnosis echoes that of Caroline's own psychiatrists, it draws a very different conclusion, and one that undermines the argument that Caroline was not responsible for her actions.
She reaches a different conclusion, obviously, that Caroline was not suffering from a mental disease or defect of such significance as to render her unable to substantially appreciate the nature or consequences of her act, or that it was wrong, and that's the legal test of insanity.
After 18 months, the prosecution and defense still disagree about Caroline's mental state at the time she gave birth. The whole case will now be resolved either by a full trial or by a plea bargain, being agreed between the two sides. The DA says that she would drop the murder charge if Caroline pleads guilty to manslaughter and receives a jail sentence. Michael Dowd says that jail is unacceptable, but above all, he wants to avoid the risk of Caroline going on trial for murder.
I mean, one has to understand if Caroline Beale were to be convicted in this case, she would not likely be able to return to England till she's almost 60 years old. And she's just 31.
Michael Dowd believes that Caroline Beale is innocent and should not have been charged in the first place. But before her next court appearance in 7 days' time, he may have to advise her to plead guilty to manslaughter. It would be a bitter pill. She would receive a jail sentence of between 5 months and 5 years. But for Caroline Beale, it may be the only option available.
I mean, the bottom line here is what's best for Caroline Beale. And that's the objective I have to keep fixed on throughout this whole process.
And that is?
Get her home, where she belongs. Get her back in the UK with her friends and family, hopefully back at her job, living her life as the good and decent person that she is and always has been. And try to put this terrible experience and tragedy behind her.
Caroline Beale, the British woman who killed a newborn baby in America, arrived back in Britain today for psychiatric treatment. But in New York, the judge who sentenced her made some astonishing remarks about British justice. Here's Ian Glover-James.
The nightmare in New York is over. Caroline Beale back in London, entering a psychiatric institute for treatment, part of the deal that freed her.
Good to be back, Caroline.
Wonderful.
Caroline.
How the New York court system has handled this case has been attacked by Caroline Beale's parents. Sentencing her last night, the judge fired back.
It is my understanding that Mrs. Beale's family has frequently criticized our justice system and the prosecution in this case for being, and I quote, barbaric and uncivilized in our treatment of the defendant and our laws which allowed the prosecution in the first place. As to their criticism of our laws, I will say this. With our laws that mandate the prosecution of people who kill their children, protecting the children rather than excusing the killer is our primary focus in this country.
And the Irish-American judge then attacked British conduct of some IRA trials like that of the Guildford Four, while setting her probation terms.
That probation is going to be served in Great Britain, that great country that has convicted a great many people on a perjured testimony of their police, allowed them to spend 15 or 17 years in prison, did everything to see that they remained in prison even though they knew or should have known that they didn't belong in there. But anyway, I won't let that interfere with what I'm doing here.
Nor should he, according to British lawyers monitoring the case.
The most remarkable thing is that he ventures off into the political world. Again, you wouldn't hear a judge in this country say that, or indeed anything like it. And if he did, he'd probably get a stiff letter from the Lord Chancellor.
Now Caroline Beale needs psychiatric help.
Caroline is safe and well. She's very tired.
Tired, but in expert hands here, a condition of her New York bail. Ian Glover-James, News at 10 in South London.